Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to AI and the Planet. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, some very, very positive, exciting work going on, and some of the more frightening aspects of how quickly the technology is moving. Before we get started though, a little bit about me. My name is Terry Donaldson. I've been an environmental and energy lawyer for over 25 years now. I was a federal prosecutor for 9 years. I was general counsel of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And then I was a partner in large international energy-driven law firms for over a decade. I then went to the Senate, where I was the general counsel of the Environment and Public Works Committee. And then I spent 6 years as the Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Energy. I am currently at Georgetown University studying law and technology. And I've also spent the last academic year at Vanderbilt teaching, writing, and learning about some of the work that Vanderbilt is doing in this particular space, which is exploring what artificial intelligence can do to make vast improvements to environmental protection, something very near and dear to my heart. It's all very multidisciplinary, meaning that environmental benefits and understanding those benefits and how artificial intelligence can be deployed involves all bunch of different aspects of Vanderbilt. It involves the College of Connected Computing, the engineering schools, and of course the law school. So getting to know all the people doing work in this space has been a real pleasure. The most recent addition to the Vanderbilt family, harnessing artificial intelligence, is the National Security Institute. So there is a lot of work going on in Nashville. Today we're going to focus on some of those projects that are already underway. So these aren't just an idea, they aren't aspirational, not theoretical. These are projects that are already underway, harnessing artificial intelligence for the benefit of the environment. Now, in case you missed the panel this morning, Professor Vandenberg is at Vanderbilt. He is one of the professors studying how artificial intelligence can be utilized to better protect the environment. And the panel this morning, I would encourage you to find it online if you did miss it earlier today. It really encouraged all of us to think about not just what the government can do to protect the environment, but maybe even more importantly, what the private sector can do to protect the environment and to better understand those tools. So harnessing AI, for example, to create unified metrics for environmental disclosures, to enhance the use of certifications, standards, labeling. Those types of things could result in tremendous environmental benefit, all courtesy of the proper deployment of artificial intelligence. So I'm going to introduce the two speakers we have today. We are very fortunate to have two of the nation's leading experts in this area. I'm going to introduce them in reverse order. Because I believe that we should end on the high note of all of the wonderful positive projects that are going on. But we also have to cover a little bit of the burdens. So I will introduce first our Vanderbilt professor, who is Dr. Hussam Mahmood. He is sitting one chair over. He is the Craig E. Phillip Endowed Chair of Engineering, a professor of civil and environmental engineering, and he's the director of the Vanderbilt Center for Sustainability, Energy, and Climate in Nashville. He is an international authority on infrastructure and community resilience, an advisor to the World Bank and the International Science Council, the United Nations, various insurance companies, and numerous agencies. He's authored over 350 publications, given hundreds of presentations, been invited to make talks in international conferences, given many distinguished lectures, and won numerous awards. He is our second speaker today, and he's going to tell you more about some of those projects at Vanderbilt already underway, harnessing artificial intelligence for the benefit of the environment. But before we take a look at those projects, I want to spend some time looking at a particular challenge to the use of artificial intelligence. This challenge is something that we have to understand to make absolutely sure that these systems aren't immediately threatened by cyber attacks. As artificial intelligence creates this enormous opportunity for things to be faster, better, more efficient, and completely digitized, it also creates an opportunity for cyber attacks to be even more serious. So what we're going to lead with today is also not theoretical. These are threats that are here today, very much among us. So we have to understand this as we are developing these AI systems. This is not an afterthought. It has to come first so that the systems are in fact safe. So our first speaker today is David Thomas. He recently retired as the global head of security for Gulfstream Aerospace, where he led enterprise security operations supporting a global aerospace and defense environment. He was the person in charge of the insider threats and protective intelligence and wore various other hats in his role as the head of security for Gulfstream. Prior to joining Gulfstream, Mr. Thomas served as special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Columbia Division in South Carolina. Over a distinguished FBI career, he held several senior leadership roles, including Deputy Executive Assistant Director of the Science and Technology Branch at FBI headquarters. He was also the chief of various units responsible for counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal and cyber investigations. Agent Thomas is a recognized subject matter expert in cybercrime and the application of forensic and investigative capabilities to counter evolving threats, with a focus on protecting critical infrastructure, intellectual property, global operations from nation-state and insider threats. Agent Thomas?
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. And thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and talk to you a little bit about this. And I'm going to bring a little bit of a reality, a little bit of clarity probably. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, I realize I'm the burden person here, but don't take that to mean that I'm anti-artificial intelligence at all, because I'm not. I do love technology and have worked in technology, but I've lived all of my adult life for 40 plus years on the dark side, and I look at security from a different standpoint, probably a little bit different speaker than you're used to, just because of my background. I've served in 2 different 3-letter agencies, and what you find out over time is that what you look at as an exciting opportunity, we look at on my side as an opportunity for exploitation. And AI is one of those things that it's a freight train. It's like you either get on board or you get ran over by it. It's going to take us all in that direction. And one of the things I've found out throughout my career, it's not the technology really, but it's change. And it's not necessarily change, it's how do we adapt to change as individuals, as people. And most people don't adapt to change very well. I'll give you a good example of that. So we all have a crazy family member. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I have multiple ones. But number one, my brother Jerry. My brother Jerry had a neighbor, and the neighbor had a pet rabbit. And my brother doesn't believe rabbits should be suitable pets. And so Jerry never cared for the rabbit at all. Well, the neighbor goes on vacation, and lo and behold, Jerry's dog walks into the house, and inside the dog's mouth is a rabbit. The rabbit's covered in mud, blood, and my brother did what I'm sure anyone would have done in that situation. He takes the rabbit, goes upstairs, he shampoos it, he blow dries it, combs the rabbit out, takes it back, puts it back in the cage. And so lo and behold, Jerry knew what would happen. Eventually he'd get the knock on the door, which he did. Neighbor comes back from vacation, and he comes in and says, Jerry, said the funny thing happened. He said, we go on vacation, but before we left, the rabbit died. We buried it in the front yard. We come back home and it's back in the cage. And it's not. I said, Jerry, my brother didn't adapt to change in a very good way. And I know when we talk about exploiting AI and doing things, who does that? Who would be responsible for doing that? And most people haven't ever worked with nation states. A lot of it starts off with nation states, Russia, China, and others. Now, how does that really work? How many of you have ever met a spy? Believe it or not, other than me, believe it or not, you probably have and don't even know it. And to give you a good example of just kind of how does that work? I know you've seen it on television, it's like, wait a minute, why would a spy be interested in anything I do? I don't have classified information, I don't have state secrets. 10% of what spies look for are really state secrets. Generally speaking, they're looking for intellectual property. They're looking to steal information, technology. They're looking for other types of exploitation of governments. And we started a program several years ago back with 2 different agencies. We recruited one of the top Russian spies, the highest level KGB officer to ever be recruited into the United States. And his name was Sergei Tetrikov. Sergei, he spied on the United States for over 20 years. He was based in New York. And after numerous debriefings that normally happen when we have someone like that, we come up with a grand idea of why don't we take Sergei out to conferences like this and to businesses and to universities and other places and let Sergei tell them, this is how I spied on you. You know, what better way to find out how counterintelligence and espionage works than to hear from the spy himself? And he actually, you know, unfortunately, it's a whole other story. Sergei's not with us now anymore. He's passed on, but he did write a book. It's called Comrade J, and it was written by an author, Peter Early, if anyone ever is interested in knowing a little bit more about how that actually works. But I was with Sergei down in a conference in Huntsville, Alabama, and Sergei came in and he said, Dave, you know, spying is so easy in the United States. He said, I can't believe how easy it is. He said, your democracy, your laws, the way things happen in the United States, you just make it easy for people like me. And all the things that we love and we wouldn't change, they see as a way to exploit us, and they do. And so Sergei said, just to give you an example, Dave, he says, you know, I was just down at the gift shop, and there was a lady in the gift shop, and she speaks Russian. She had a Russian accent, and I asked her, I said, do you speak Russian? Or, yes, and are you from Russia? She said, yes, I am. And I asked her, I said, why are you in Huntsville, Alabama? She said, my son lives here. He works for NASA. And she says, I'm so very proud of him. And he says, oh, that's really good. And he says, so Dave, I would have gone back to the embassy that night. I would have had one of our analysts do a dossier. And we would have come back in probably 2 days later, and I would approach her, and the dossier would have every business associate, every family, everything mapped out, and I would hand it to her, and I would tell her, unless your son, everything that crosses his desk comes to me, I will kill them or destroy them. And it's the KGB, and if you live in Russia, you know that's true. That's how the KGB works. We have a lot of students, if you're in a university system, a lot of students get into espionage, not because they want to, but because their country pressures them to. And that's why you have to build programs, especially in the university system. I worked a lot with several universities, and a program can't be based on ethnicity. It's got to be based on, hey, we want you to trust us to come to us. If your country, you know, pressures you to do something wrong like that, don't get arrested for espionage. Sometimes countries do it out of ego. A lot of you probably followed in the news lately of the Artemis project. We're going back to the moon again. I grew up during the Apollo missions, and it was very exciting what was going on. And a couple of the spies that we recruited would tell us, and they said, Dave, the reason we spy on the United States is that you lead the world in technology. And that's the case, and you can argue that on several different points, but what other country in the world has successfully placed a man on the moon? And with the limited technology that we had then. But I worked with another spy, and a Cuban spy. He was spying for the Russians also, but he was spying on the space shuttle program. And he says, Dave, the Russians were so incensed when the United States started the space shuttle program. And I was like, well, you know, why is that? He said, because he said they saw the United States as very arrogant. Some of you may be old enough to remember, but when the first space shuttle flew, it actually flew manned. That was the first time that a space capsule had ever flown with a human in it. Before then, because it was such a dangerous thing, the capsules would go up with a chimpanzee, with a dog, or a different animal in there so they could test. But the Russians saw that as complete arrogance on the part of the United States and issued a huge program to spy on the space shuttle. And if you go online, you can Google the Russian space shuttle, and you can see photos of it, and you'll see that it looks exactly like the U.S. space shuttle, but it never flew. Renee said, Dave, I was tasked with spying, and I was in Florida at that time, at Cape Canaveral, and he says, and we caught him, but his job was to spy on the space shuttle program. He said, we knew because of the Challenger incident that the space shuttle, that one of the biggest issues was the tiles, the heat tiles. And he said, so we actually stole that. We were very good there, but he said the one thing that we never could steal was the glue. And the fact that if you can't get the tiles to stick, you couldn't get the glue, their space shuttle never flew. And if you followed any, again, of the Artemis mission, you saw, the first thing they did when the capsule come back was examine those heat shields, because it's still a huge issue. And so trying to protect the technology of the United States is something that we've done historically, and it's not always easy to do. And I know you're thinking, well, this is an environmental conference, Dave. How does that apply to us? And very simply, if you look at some of the technology I was just seeing the other day, that for farmers, I grew up on a farm. I'm very familiar with farming. And a lot of the technology coming out now, certain machineries coming out where farmers can use, and it actually, AI has developed over 175,000 plants in a database, and the machine can go up and down the rows of various crop rows and has a CO2 laser, and it can zap weeds, and that could be tremendous for a farmer. But it can also be tremendous for someone who wants to exploit that. If I can poison the AI data that runs that machine, if I can change that, and maybe I have it poison the actual plant itself. Or farms depend on pollinators. I was just talking to a lady over in one of the other sections over here about pollinators, something that I'm very passionate about also, but you could poison the plants or destroy all the plants without pollinators. The crops aren't going to do well at all. And it could be a nation state wanting to affect your crops. It could be a competitor wanting to end the crops that you have and sell their crops. And another system that I saw was also a lot of farms, especially the larger farms, run on large irrigation systems, fertilizer systems. Would be very easily to go into and poison data going into a fertilizer system also. If you have a plant, say a potato, potato needs when you fertilize, it's based on an NPP, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratio. Potatoes don't like nitrogen. If you put a lot of nitrogen in, a potato looks like it's a beautiful plant, but it doesn't produce any tubers. And so you adjust your fertilizer correctly. And if you don't do that as a farmer, if you poison the data of that going in, and then then you could ruin the crops. If the farmer would think he has a beautiful crop and he goes to harvest and there's nothing there. And so I did a lot of work at one time in Africa working on poachers that were looking for rhinoceros, looking for elephant tusk. The exact same AI that's out there now, which I've talked to some of my friends that are over there, and they say this is amazing technology, Dave, because it can track where all the rhinoceros are at. It can track where the elephants are, where the tusks are. But at the same time, that technology, if it's exploited, can be used to tell poachers where those animals are, so those animals can be slaughtered also. And the one thing that you learn in my business all the time is action is always faster than reaction. So a criminal doesn't need a search warrant, he doesn't need permission, he doesn't need anything, so they can move faster than we can. So in summary, it's just that we will implement AI, but we need to concentrate on how we do it well. The one thing that we look at in my world is always trust but verify. And this goes beyond that. It's trust but verify, but also secure and secure and audit. I can't count the number of computer intrusions I've deployed to all over the world in major companies and companies that I've done consulting with, and I go in and they say, Dave, we're a fortress, we're an absolute fortress here. Well, I look at things from an offensive, that was my job, is how to break into things throughout my career. And after about 5 minutes, they fold up pretty quick, and it isn't as much as a fortress as they think it is, because they don't think like the bad guys think on that. So it's a different way of doing that. And if anybody has questions afterward about that or wants to talk about, hey, if you have a startup, if you have something about what kind of questions should I ask or should I be asking security-wise that might surprise some of my security experts, please let me know that. But the most important thing, as Terry said, was to get into the presentation of the cutting edge work that Vanderbilt's doing now. There's a lot of companies and universities out there now that are cognizant of security aspects. They're on the cutting edge of some of this technology, and some exciting things going on at Vanderbilt. So I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart.
Thank you. Yeah, great remarks. Thanks a lot. So I will probably share some slides here that kind of highlight some of the work we've been thinking about and doing at Vanderbilt that relates to AI, some really exciting stuff. And I'll just show a few examples of what we're doing. Let's see, here it goes. So this is just an outline of the presentation. I'll just give a brief one slide on what's AI and artificial neural networks. And then I'll show, share with you some of the exciting numbers on how adoption of AI and ANN is picking up at Vanderbilt, and maybe some case studies to show you what we're doing. So let's see. Really, if you look at artificial intelligence, machine learning, really artificial intelligence or AI is a broad concept of machine acting intelligently. And machine learning is nothing but a subset of that, focused on data. And you can take this down more to look at artificial intelligence and then understand or artificial neural networks, which is another subset of that. How do you actually train data, and how do you understand the layers that go through when you train these data to get the most important concepts? So we're trying to kind of look at how these different models are inspired by how the brain thinks or how the brain works. And ultimately, we're trying to connect the different layers of neurons or data, in this case, to recognize patterns and be able to have some predictions in our analysis. So let me just show you some really interesting numbers of how this is growing. And you can see on the slides the number of projects that have been submitted or pending, the number of projects that have been funded, and the overall also unfunded. And you can see an uptick in the number of proposals that are being submitted, funded, and pending, going from 2024 to 2026. It is also clear that even though now we're halfway, not even halfway through 2026, the total number of proposals is actually a lot more than what we have in 2025 or 2024. So I would probably assume by the end of the year, the numbers for 2026, total number of proposals will have doubled what you see on the screen here, which is really exciting. The other thing I will share with you is that this data shows the top 15 departments by entry count in terms of who got funded. These are not the funded, these are the total proposals. But you can see, of course, computer science is heavy. Institute for Integrated Systems is also heavy. But the interesting thing is that you can see AI-based proposals that have been submitted across many departments on campus. The law school have some proposals that show up here. The Department of Sociology, education, and of course engineering has quite a bit. Computer science has quite a bit. But so there is growing interest, and of course with that growing interest, there is growing demand. And one would have to then understand how some of these projects are addressing environmental questions or environmental problem. And I'm not sure if you can see this from far back because of the font, but just the idea here that there is a number of proposals that have been submitted. This is just an example, looking into wildfires, for example, and how they impact communities. There is proposals looking at, for example, infrastructure systems and heat. There's proposals looking at ecological systems, and there are proposals looking at climate and health, all centered around AI. So at Vanderbilt, there is, of course, a very strong interest in looking at environmental problems and how AI can be used to answer these complex problems that we're dealing with. And I also want to share that in that regard, Vanderbilt has recently launched a really cool initiative to look at quantum computing. So there is a massive campus that is in the process of being launched here to look at quantum computing. With quantum computing, of course, comes the question of environmental impact of these big campuses or data centers that deal with large computation power or resources that become very important. And as Terry mentioned, our very dear colleague here, Dr. Michael Vanderberg, has been doing really great work looking at how private governance can have a big impact on how we can regulate energy usage and how can we manage energy usage in that regard. So there's a lot of really cool work that Michael is doing on understanding how we can optimize the use of these different data centers to essentially shift the demand and be able to optimize the process. There is also some interesting work that is taking place on looking at heat. This work is being done essentially to try to understand how heat impacts infrastructure system and how climate change in general would have an impact on infrastructure system. To be able to understand this, of course, we have to look at the interdependencies and how all these systems are connected. So there's a lot of really cool work to develop interdependency matrices that allows you to capture how, for example, water is impacted by transportation or electric is impacted by water and so on. And by the way, as someone who works very heavily in that work, this work is not led by me, but as someone who works in that area, I can tell you there is massive lack of information related to interdependent systems and how they're connected. But this work is being done in the context of heat. And there's a really cool project taking place. My dear colleague, JP Raoul at Vanderbilt also Law School is leading that with a vision of leveraging digital twin technology to develop and model local infrastructure and interdependencies, leveraging climate projection models, collecting data, that includes data on the infrastructure, but also climate adaptation plans, and then testing that digital twin model against, in this case, he's looking at heat as an initial stress scenario. But of course, this model is flexible enough to be able to take into consideration other stressors. And for those who are not familiar with digital twins, it's essentially a model, a computer model that depicts reality. The idea is that you are collecting data real time from your infrastructure, maybe from your population, maybe from different systems, and then you're feeding that into your computer model to update the model and come up with the decisions on the spot. I would also say that there is a really strong collaboration on this going forward with the city of Nashville. And of course, there is a big team. JP is leading this, but there are a few people from different departments, including engineering, of course, and other areas that are working with JP. And so if you are thinking of something to that magnitude and that level, for your city, please reach out, and we're happy to make the connection with JP and his team and talk to you further. Of course, they're not, again, as Terry mentioned, we're not just thinking about this. This work is moving forward, and they're putting together really cool simulators that allows them to understanding, monitoring, and pull information from systems real time and come up with the decisions on the spot. One of the other really cool projects that are taking place right now is electric vehicle for energy stability. And Abhishek Dubey is the PI working on this, doing great work. And the idea here is that can we use electrical vehicles to supply power to the power grid, and which in return will be used to maybe even power homes across communities, or even used for public transit. And how can you actually then configure this process if you're dealing with extreme events? If you have natural hazards that are impacting your community, how would you be able to do that? And to be able to do it, you have to actually develop an optimization protocol that allows you to understand how much energy you're getting from these vehicles, electric vehicles, how much energy do you have, so the demand side of things, which is the load prediction, is being predicted using AI models, and how do you actually distribute that across different communities spatially. So this is really interesting work that is going on right now. And finally, I will share with you a few slides that relates to some of the work we're doing on wildfire risk. This work is being done within my group. And we are we're doing quite a bit on wildfires. So one of the things that we have done is develop an AI model to predict wildfire burn and wildfire damage across the state of California. There are some AI models that have been developed for the burn area, but there is very limited work, if any, that has been done for building damage, let alone for the entire state. The conditioning factors are essentially the input variables. Of course, you need inputs on the built environment, input on wind, input on fuel, input maybe on population, because population, demographics, and so on can be used as a proxy for maybe fuel that people have around their homes, maybe maintenance of their homes, and so on. So that is very important consideration. And so we've collected a lot of information across the state of California using historic events, and we're training these events to see if we can produce the damage. You saw the wind and fuel kind of popping in an animation, because I'll talk about wind and fuel in a second in terms of what we're doing to collect the data on wind and fuel, because they have to be part of our input data. But before I show you the work on the fuel, this is just the wildfire damage map for the entire state of California under different wind conditions, and this just shows you which area of California is more impacted by easterly wind versus westerly winds. This is the first wildfire damage map for the entire state of California that ever been produced, which is very exciting. I got an email from CAL FIRE a couple days ago. Somehow they found out about the dissertation that the student wrote. It's under embargo for a couple of years until we publish. So they are very interested in the work that we've done. But in order for us to produce this map, train the AI model based on historical wildfire burn and damage to produce this map, we need really good data on fuel and on wind. We developed it with limited data, but now we're enhancing the work by getting better data on the fuel and on the wind. So let me kind of show you a couple examples. What you see here is an area. This is Marble, Colorado, just to give you an example. And what you see on the bottom left is how detailed the wind is when you downscale the wind. Essentially, instead of assuming constant wind everywhere, you need to really hone down on what that wind looks like on the landscape. So if you do that, you'll get that bottom left picture showing that wind, the kind of crazy wind over the entire landscape. But that way of getting the wind to a very fine detail doesn't take into consideration how buildings impact the wind, right? Because buildings themselves will have an impact on what that wind looks like. And so these here should be two videos that did not actually work. Oops, this went too far forward. Let me go back. So this here shows two videos on this slide that are supposed to run, but they're not running. I don't know why. But it shows how the wind is impacting, how the buildings are impacting winds. Even without me running them as videos, you can see how the wind is actually changing between the buildings. So downscaling the wind without the inclusion of buildings does not give you the correct wind profile. And when we developed an AI model, essentially we developed this very detailed engineering computer using something called computational fluid dynamics. And we run tons of models, 4,000 different models based on different arrangements of buildings. Ultimately, what you get, if you want to run it on one specific community using this very high fidelity model, you get the left picture. Using the AI trained the model, we get the right picture. Now we're able to downscale wind for any community in a second. Instead of actually downscaling the wind and running a model that will take us days to run, now we can get the wind downscaled in literally seconds. Of course, what you see on the left-hand side is the wind for a very small community. Reality is much bigger than that. So we have a way of taking our model, which was developed for small communities, and then scaling that across very large communities. So that's using what we call hybrid neural network models, using physics-informed neural networks. And so to show to kind of see this on a much bigger scale, this is a map of a community in Santa Barbara. You can see on the left-hand side what the wind looks like without any buildings. You can see on the right-hand side what the wind looks like when you include buildings. And right now, with our wildfire model, we're working with 37 communities across the country to model the wind, model the fire hazard, and come up with mitigation strategies for these communities. So our work on wildfire has taken off super fast, which has been really exciting ride for us. And wind is one thing, as I mentioned. The other thing that we're super interested in is mapping fuel. There's different things that we want to do with mapping the fuel. One of them is to detect the object. So I want to know if you have a building, or if you have a road, or if you have a car or a tree or whatever. I also want to segment whatever that object is. I want to know what is that volume of whatever I detected, what's the area and what's the volume, because ultimately getting the volume tells me something about how much heat flux I'm getting out of this object if I burn it, right? So I want to know how much fuel I have, fuel volume, because that's an indication of how much heat flux that object will produce. So we've trained really cool AI models that allows us to detect these objects, to tell us what the areas are using what's called semantic segmentation versus instance segmentation. Instance is a very, very fast process that gives us really good results. So here is just the object detection, just to show you what that looks like. This is actually a drone that we were flying over Fort Collins, Colorado, and without me doing anything, the model will just tell me what's what, and it'll tell me where it's located, and it'll tell me the type of the roof or the type of vegetation and so on. And as you can imagine, insurance companies would be really interested, super interested in something like this. As I kind of sort of walked you through this, I will mention that, again, that these are just few examples of some of the work we're doing at Vanderbilt on using AI for different engineering problems, coupling in some cases social science. Dr. Michael Vanderberg and I have been talking about how governance and how engineering kind of can merge together to address some of the problems that either problems I discussed, or one of the areas we're super interested in is data centers and how you can actually regulate them. So there's tons of opportunities for linking different disciplines together to come up with optimal solutions that will ultimately work. In summary, I will just finish by saying there's a rapid use of AI and digital twins for a host of complex problems. We're doing that at Vanderbilt. Other universities are doing the same thing. AI is transforming really environmental problems and how we look at them. And we're collaborating with many stakeholders. We would really love the opportunity to collaborate with other people and other stakeholders. So if you're out there and you can see how some of your ideas might kind of fit with the work we are doing, we would be very happy to talk to you and figure out ways to collaborate. With that, I conclude, and thank you so much.
And thank you to both of you. We don't have a specific time set aside for questions, but I would say that Vanderbilt is such a highly collaborative place, and it does have partners outside of Vanderbilt, quite a few of them. So please, if you have questions, come up. We'd love to meet you. There are partnerships outside of the university, for example, with national labs, private companies. Vanderbilt does not exist in a vacuum. So if you have a particular interest in any of these issues, please come up and we'll tell you more about it. And maybe in closing, I'll say that the digital twin of Nashville, that project I think is just absolutely fascinating. So by collecting as much environmental information about Nashville as we can possibly collect, looking at water, waste, power, and how all of those things are interconnected, by collecting all of that up and all of the climatological information, that project seeks to predict when infrastructure failure may happen. It's called cascading failure, where you could actually lose the infrastructure. It pulls one aspect of it pulls down the next aspect of it. To be able to understand that across media and to predict the failure is amazing. And that cannot happen with the old-fashioned tools. So what artificial intelligence brings to this is astonishing. If you can predict it, you can achieve greater efficiencies. You can avoid those disasters. You can inform consumers about what their everyday behaviors might mean to the environment in 1 year or 2 years. It's amazing to think of the potential. So we'll close with that. Thank you both very, very much. Great job.